Bé, benvinguts de nou. Reprenem les sessions, les ponències d'aquest 10è Congrés d'Intel·ligència Artificial i Big Data. En l'anterior ponència hem vist com la intel·ligència artificial transformarà sobretot el sector financer i en concret hem parlat de la relació amb els usuaris i els clients. Això ja passa, però sobretot passarà en molts d'altres àmbits perquè la IA, sobretot ja sigui la IA analítica tradicional, però sobretot la IA generativa, s'ha convertit i esdevindrà una eina global. I una conseqüència directa de tot plegat és l'impacte en el medi ambient, l'impacte ambiental que generarà la intel·ligència artificial degut al gran consum energètic que necessiten, per exemple, les eines de còmput o també l'aigua que s'utilitza en els sistemes de refrigeració dels grans centres de processament de dades. Això és paradoxal, perquè, per altra banda, la intel·ligència artificial ens podria ajudar, per exemple, a combatre i entendre el canvi climàtic. Com? En donem alguns exemples. Per exemple, ajudant i analitzant a predir l'evolució del gel a la superfície terrestre i, per tant, controlar el degel, també mapejar, per exemple, la deforestació. O un altre exemple, ajudant a optimitzar el consum energètic, tant en l'àmbit domèstic com industrial. Per tant, aquesta paradoxa es pot entendre com encaixa la intel·ligència artificial i la sostenibilitat. Joan, el següent ponent ens pot ajudar a respondre algunes d'aquestes qüestions.
Gràcies, Cristina. So let's switch to English to introduce our next speaker. And for sure, she will be able to answer these questions and many others. She's got an outstanding curriculum. She's a technology leader. She's a venture capital investor. She is a best-selling scientific author. She's an entrepreneur and many other things. She's got plenty of awards and distinctions. The most recent one is that Forbes magazine included her in their list of the 50 most influential senior women in the United States. We are talking about Rika Nakazawa. She is Chief Commercial Innovation at Entity Data. She's just arrived from Japan to deliver us her speech today, which has a very suggestive title, and it says something like, what happens if artificial intelligence and sustainability meet at a bar? So let's welcome Rika Nakazawa. Rika, please, the floor is yours.
Hello, hola, konnichiwa. Nice to see everybody today. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of the 10th Annual Congress. And I will start by saying that I wish I spoke Spanish. And I learned Spanish, actually, about 15 years ago, just a little bit, un poquito. And my professor, my teacher, I was living in New York City, she was Colombian. And you can debate this later, but she said that Colombian Spanish is the purest form of Spanish. So I thought, okay, great. So day one, when you're learning a second language, what is one of the first things that you learn is how you introduce yourself. And so we were going around the room, and it was, yo soy John, yo soy Amy, yo soy Lisa, and I was like, yo soy Rika. She's like, oh, Rika, no, you don't say yo soy Rika. You say, mi nombre es Rika, okay? It's like, ¿por qué? Okay. So I'm very excited to share with you some insights today about AI and sustainability. And I don't know in other cultures, but in the English culture, one of the ways to break the ice is with some jokes. And one of the more common ways that somebody will break the ice with a joke in English is to say, a priest and a Zen monk and a rabbi walk into a bar. And so I thought, okay, let's make this interesting. And this is no joke, of course, but to break the ice is to say, okay, let's think about what would happen if AI and sustainability walked into a bar. And just to drive one point home, I wanted to share with you my experience in putting this image together using DALL-E. So the prompt that I asked DALL-E, I said, create an image for me that personifies AI and sustainability walking into a bar. And so the first image that came back, and I wanted to make sure that I was very careful with the prompts because each prompt uses an incredible amount of energy, as many of you know. And this whole talk is about sustainability and AI, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The first image DALL-E got back to me was where the woman was sustainability, wearing green leaves and green and all, water flowing around her, and the man was AI, very robotic, Terminator-like. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. A moment of bias in the system. Nothing malicious about it, just simply what it came back to me with. And so I said, reverse the roles to be able to come up with this image, which is deliberate, of course, just to change up some of the embedded bias. Then what I thought was very interesting in the second image that came back was DALL-E chose to keep the word AI, as you see in the image. And AI, for those of you who know Japanese, because sometimes when you learn a second language, if you go to another country, you learn how to say I am, yo soy rica. And the second thing you might learn, because you fall in love with somebody in that country, is love. And the word for love in Japanese is ai, which is spelled AI. So there you go. This is going to be a story of a love affair between sustainability and AI. So today, with what I share with you and with what we discuss, because I would love for you to ask any questions, is revolving around three major parts of the story of AI and sustainability meeting at a bar. One is around the pandemic. I know nobody talks about the pandemic anymore because we all want to forget about it, but please bear with me. I will bring back the pandemic into this narrative because it's important for us to understand how the pandemic was more a digidemic. It's a word I invented. I'll explain a little bit. Hopefully it will make some sense. And then number two is this idea of ultra-system design. How many of you have been through design thinking courses or really around agile development? So one of the things oh, that's amazing. This is great. So one of the things that you learn in design thinking is really around how everything starts to be interconnected and to start understanding how those pieces and parts start to work together. Well, we're going to talk about and understand how AI and sustainability are both about system design. And when you bring them together, now it's about ultra-system design. And that becomes very challenging, and we'll come out of this very positive about how we can address such a complex situation. And then the third one is around the sustainability and AI alloy. Now, alloy is the term used for a piece of metal that has one type of metal on one side and another type of metal on the other side. And depending on what it is that you're trying to do, it's helpful to have two different metals that are attached because they work together. And so the third piece is where we'll talk about how sustainability and AI are a necessary alloy at the speed of light and at the edge of space. So that all sounds very mysterious. I promise it will all become clear, hopefully, by the end of this talk. So the digidemic I define as what happened during the pandemic, which was this great digitalization. There was this digitization of assets and digitalization of processes. And it was necessary because with the pandemic, everybody was working from home or trying to find ways to do things remotely. The huge uplift in the number of people that were using devices, applications, all of these things really accelerated the digitalization and digitization of how we work, live, and play. Then there was this burst of emerging technologies. And by the way, my email is at the end of the presentation, so if you'd like a copy of this, please email me. I'm happy to share it. So Gartner had this wonderful way of depicting the various aspects of emerging technologies. And what you have here are one section around compute, infrastructure, and platform services. You have network security, digital workplace, IT automation, storage and database. I'm proud to say that NTT Data plays in all of these different sectors. And then what you have on the shift in the different spheres is in monitoring and planning and pilot, deployment completion by 2022, deployment completion 2021. Of course, this is dated, but the point is that this is something that Gartner put forward on the conclusion of the pandemic, although we shall see conclusions if they hold. But nonetheless, there were more than 111 emerging technologies that burst onto the scene in this era of a digidemic. And so all of this started to illuminate some of the ways that we need to think about the role that emerging technologies play around the sustainability of business, the sustainability of communities, the sustainability of government. And so let's first talk about our heartbeat, about sustainability. So I had a hypothesis. One of the things that I noticed, maybe I can ask the room here, I'm sorry to bring you back to the pandemic, but please bear with me. During the pandemic, how many of you saw more wildlife in your neighborhood? Just foxes, raccoons, deer, right? If any of you were in LA, you saw mountains. People didn't know LA had mountains because they couldn't see more than 100 feet because of the smog. And so there was this awareness and understanding of nature that happened during the pandemic. And of course, health matters became paramount. And so lo and behold, no surprise, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, the number of news articles that started to talk about sustainability blossomed. And ESG became something that was very paramount in the front of mind for enterprises and businesses, ESG for environmental, social, and governance. And of course, what you see here in this map that's representing the number of stories, news stories that were exhibited pre-pandemic and during pandemic, post-pandemic, you see here now there's an interlacing of technology and sustainability. So as enterprises and industries confronted the need to harness this energy that was going into sustainability, how do you do that? You can't improve what you don't measure. And so how do you use technology to help you achieve some of those sustainability goals that were being driven by your employees? So companies, employees, if you were interviewing talent, new talent, more and more the next generation were asking very specific questions about sustainability, whether it was your investors, because now sustainability started to get materially tied to risk. So investors were starting to demand and say, what are your sustainability? And so Q1s and, the reports that companies would issue, sorry, that was an American term, the reports that companies would issue were starting to include more clauses and disclosures around sustainability efforts. And so there was this blossoming and growth of sustainability, and of course what we saw and see increasingly at NTT Data is this symbiotic relationship between technology and sustainability. And so how do digital technologies help advance and inspire new ways of being able to think about achieving these sustainability goals, particularly because it's a system design. It's very hard to keep track of the permutations of effects downstream and upstream around sustainability, so being able to use technology to do that became something that was very important. And they became this circle of continuous where technology is going to help around sustainability, but then how are we more sustainable in how we use technology? So green coding and all of these different ways that we think about this came to life. I was so struck by how much the pandemic played in driving some of these sustainability paradigms and the role that digital innovation played in it that I decided to research it, and my research resulted in this book, Beyond the Black Swan. So anybody, have any of you read the book Black Swan by Nassim Taleb? Any hands on that? So Nassim Taleb, philosopher, economist, Renaissance writer, he wrote the book called The Black Swan about more than 10 years ago. And he wrote about this phenomena of these extreme world events that were catastrophic. And was telling the story of over and over how historically we've seen these black swan events that were transformative and catastrophic. And so when I started to do the research and noticed how the pandemic, whilst devastating and deadly, and in many ways was a huge shock to the system, might we remember the pandemic as a catalyst to make sustainability mainstream? And that's what I researched, and that was part of a lot of the work that I was doing and incorporating some of the things that we were doing and are doing at NTT Data around thinking about the role that we as digital and technology innovators play around that. So, and at NTT Data, the way that we think about how we interlace technology with IT is across 5 different vectors, because one of the challenges of sustainability is a very big word. And when you look at the UN SDGs, you start to become overwhelmed, and we'll come back to the UN SDGs in a moment, the Sustainable Development Goals. So the way that we simplify it for industry is one around climate and nature. And climate and nature is really looking at climate change and nature and biodiversity. So how do we think about carbon markets? How do we think about net zero strategy? How do we think about nature-based accounting? That's around climate and nature. The second category is around corporate sustainability. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier around how ESG has become an accounting of sorts in terms of ensuring that companies are demonstrating how they're committed to managing risk, where climate change is a huge risk for some sectors. So how are we thinking about corporate sustainability? And we have our own commitments at NTT to make sure that we're abiding by the same principles of contributing to net zero goals and other sustainability goals. And then sustainable value chain. And so the value chain is all about thinking about your suppliers. Are they being sustainable? Because if you yourself are being sustainable and don't have an adherence or a hygiene with how you work with your partners, then you're missing out on a big piece of doing that. And so supply chain is a critical part of how organizations and industries are able to holistically manage that. Then you have sustainable IT. And this comes back to being like, okay, sure, it's always great to get the latest iPhone every year, but is that really sustainable? Because every time a phone is manufactured, there's an immense amount of energy and carbon and all these things that go into that, including the materials. So how do we think about sustainable IT in a way of, as we advance and digitalize and digitize, and 2 billion people around the world still aren't online, how do we make sure that we are advancing all of this in a way that's going to keep sustainability in mind? And then the last one is my favorite, and this is what we're talking about mostly today, is around the role that innovating technologies and emerging technologies play in incredible breakthroughs and ways about thinking about things in ways that we couldn't have thought about before, and that's where AI starts to come in. But before we go to AI, the other interesting development that I write about in my book is how there was this galvanization of policymakers and governments to address some of the critical challenges around sustainability that was coming into the scene. And so the Green Deal with the European Union, the US started working on the notion of SEC climate reporting. Other different parts of the world started introducing regulation as a way to be able to be the arbiter in many ways across multiple different groups, because in one company alone, sustainability is a system design. Now you multiply that across many, many companies and across it starts to become very unwieldy. So governments are stepping in to try to provide the right guidelines, the right incentives to make that happen. And policy isn't just about regulation. Policy is also about funding the right things. And so policy has been continuing to evolve and move forward with multiple countries working together. So that was our heartbeat about sustainability. And now we'll talk about the brain beat. Yes, new word. So on the brain beat, as we talk about AI and Gen AI, of course, AI is not new, as many of you know. It's the overnight phenomena that's been 80 years in the making, going back to the first compute, whether that's the Turing principles of trying to detect the difference between what's human and what's computers, to yesterday, the Nobel Peace Prize, or the Nobel Prize, went to John Hopfield and Geoffrey Hinton, two incredibly influential leaders within the world of AI. They started their work around this in the early 1980s. So John Hopfield, who teaches at Princeton, my alma mater, he's 91. I plan to live to 130, so 91's, hey, that's nothing, right? So he's 91. And Geoffrey Hinton, I think, is in his late 70s. But they both started to think about, can we use compute to mimic the brain around pattern recognition and image recovery and all the, or information recovery? And so they started this work in the 1980s. And they win the Nobel Prize now in 2024, yesterday. They got $1 million that they could split between them. I don't know. I just posted on my LinkedIn today. I said, I think that we should give them shares in OpenAI and NVIDIA instead of $1 million. But so AI is something that's been around, great minds working on it. But of course, what's been happening now is the Gen AI piece around the convergence of advanced technologies and then some of these training model breakthroughs that have been creating this LLM transformer ecosystem is starting to captivate everybody, from mainstream media to deep tech research and everywhere. And it's expected that Gen AI will be a $1.3 trillion market by 2032. And of course, you have the AI hype cycle, which some of us, I think, are probably in the trough of disillusionment part now, because we got so excited. And then we're trying to figure out, okay, so how much of this is real? How much of it is useful? And so we're on this journey of how we think about this. And the other piece around Gen AI is that it tends to dominate the airwaves when Gen AI is often needed to be thought within the context of good old-fashioned AI. But we'll talk more about that in a moment. So this slide is old. I kept it in here because I'm going to make a point in a moment around the investments that are happening. Oh yeah, the laser does work. Okay, great. So if you look at the distribution of Gen AI funding, and I know the audience is quite diverse, from academia, from business, from government policy. If we look at what this older slide shows is that there's a great deal of distribution on funding that's been around social media and marketing content. And then there's also cross-functional APIs. And of course, I totally use this summarization. I'm sure many of you do too. Images and NFTs. NFTs is probably not so much anymore. But you have enterprise AI avatars. And this is really around these buckets around the content creation. And then you have the generative interfaces, so human-machine interfaces, productivity, knowledge management. This one over here on the lower right, since this slide was, since this information was sourced, has been starting to get a lot more information or attention, is because people are thinking that Gen AI is now going to replace coding, or coders and programmers who make a lot of money right now. And so being able to use Gen AI to better manage libraries that then become automated and to be able to self-generate code, all of these things are very, very exciting. And that's also part of why people are very anxious about AI as well. But the reason why I kept this slide is because over here you see this hockey stick of investment. So this is the amount that's been invested. And then the orange circles are, so this is in billions of dollars. And then the orange circles are the number of deals. This 2024 number was, of course, something that was still in progress. And just remember the number here. Right now, it says 0.25 billion in 3 deals. And remember that because I'm going to come back to that number in a moment, just as contrast. And so, of course, because there's all of this investment going into AI and all the different ways it's going to impact how we code and how we live and how we create cat videos and all of these things, we at NTT Data, of course, are thinking about how you put structure around this in a way that can be deliberate and meaningful and yet also simple enough to follow some roadmap forward. So for us, it's about thinking about the entire value chain of AI. And for us, it's really about making sure that our people and the teams that we work with and our clients are really embracing some of the possibilities, because we're still, depending on who you talk to, even though AI has been 80 years in the making, we're on a new frontier with a lot of this. And so how can you use AI in these micro moments? It doesn't have to be this huge thing that just upends and transforms everything overnight. How do you find these micro moments to make that happen? And how do you measure it? You have to be mindful about how you measure these things, from increasing productivity to new value chains that you can create. And ultimately, it's knowing that Gen AI is going to have a role to play in every single function within your organization. Kind of like digital and the internet, right? It's not something that just you can contain within specific areas. It starts to spread out everywhere. And there needs to be governance around this. And so that's another piece of how we can allay some of the anxiety of AI, is to say, yes, we're thinking about the governance and eventually around the ethics and AI safety over on the right, and thinking about the technology and, of course, the culture of how we work together around something that has people nervous about it, but also some people very excited. And of course, as I mentioned about sustainability, you have a lot of regulation that's coming onto the scene. A lot of countries are very nervous because AI, the gas that drives AI is data. And here in Europe, you have a lot of regulation around GDPR and data sovereignty and data management and control. But AI is a hungry machine when it comes to data, because it is only as good as the data that you give it. And so really thinking about the role that policy plays in terms of enabling sovereignty of AI, yet also enabling the interpolation and the different ways that AI needs to cross sectors and cross borders, or will, despite your best efforts. And so once again, we're talking about the role that policymakers play in working together with technology and industry to be able to manage this moving forward. Which brings us to a question that we hear come up quite often. I was talking about this morning with somebody from the media. So AI and sustainability, are they coepithetic? Coepithetic means, can they coexist together harmoniously, more or less? And about a year and a half ago, I was having a dinner with a group of friends. There might have been a bottle or two of wine involved. But we were talking about AI. This is when everybody started talking about Gen AI, Gen AI. It's like artificial intelligence. And I was like, artificial intelligence, there's nothing artificial about artificial intelligence, because it comes from everything that we try to do to mimic our brain. And the things that makes AI work comes from organic matter. So that was one. I did debate at Princeton, so I like to kind of stand up and try to make some argument. But then I had this realization where I thought, well, actually, artificial intelligence, in the way that it's evolving, can help us figure out how to harness science and chemistry and physics that happens in the natural world from which we can learn. I'll give you an example, photosynthesis. So many of you probably learned photosynthesis in middle school, junior high, and we think we know how it works. We think we know how plants can convert sunlight into energy. And yes, we do understand most of it. But if you research and Google photosynthesis, there's one part of the electron movement in the leaf that there's no mathematical formula for it. There's no physics formula for it. Scientists still don't understand that piece of how the electron moves in the leaf. And that, I say, is organic intelligence. So they're like, organic intelligence. And the next morning I woke up, took a couple of pills for my headache, and then I was like, oh, organic intelligence, and realized that it wasn't really being used. And biomimicry is one way to talk about it. Of course, there's notions of organic intelligence. It's how planes were built, looking at how birds fly, how ships are made based on fins from animals. So the concept has existed, but in response to artificial intelligence as organic intelligence, I thought that would be, again, a nice debate point, so I trademarked organic intelligence just to prove a point. I haven't done anything with it yet, so if any of you are interested in working together with me on the concept of organic intelligence, please reach out. So, there's panic at the eDisco because artificial intelligence may be at odds with sustainability. And Sam Altman and WACWI is a term that I made up when I was putting the slide together. WACWI stands for we all know who he is. So we all know who Sam Altman is now. So we still don't appreciate the energy needs of this technology. There's no way to get there without a breakthrough. We need fusion, or we need radically cheaper solar plus storage or something. And we're going to talk about that something. So one of the key messages I have is let's keep calm, carry on, because there are great minds that are working on breakthroughs of how we make AI and sustainability copacetic, including Jensen. I worked for NVIDIA back in 2006. I was there for 4 years. I first started in the mobile group where we were working on discrete GPU architecture on phones. The use case was to enable people to watch TV on their phones, and it was primarily with Telecom Italia, so football fans could watch the games on their phones. But of course, it was high heat and low battery life. But Jensen, that discrete GPU, he changed to an application processor architecture, which became the basis of Tegra, and Tegra is now part of the foundations of where NVIDIA is going with their AI architecture and chips. So now, instead of asking the question of how can AI and sustainability coexist, why don't we ask the question as, can AI be for sustainability? And the answer is yes, of course. So these are the UN SDGs you see over on the left. And this is a way for us to think about all the different ways that Gen AI and old-fashioned AI is going to enable us to get there, because guess what? The UN SDGs have a goal by 2030. 2030. We're going into 2025 in 2 years. So speaking about anxiety, a lot of people are getting very anxious about the ability to achieve what we need to achieve without saying, oh, we're just going to push the goals out to 2040. So Gen AI is going to have a role to play around some of these key things with some of those functions in blue and some of the impacts over on the right, which we don't have time to unpack today, but again, happy to talk to you a little bit more about some of the work that's going on there. At NTT, we made the decision to demonstrate our commitment to the role that AI plays around some of the sustainability and other areas of transformation in industry. We invested in a company called Sakana AI. Sakana is a Japanese word for fish. It's founded by 2 non-Japanese people that purposefully set their startup in Japan in 2023. And the reason why they set it up in Japan was because they wanted to be able to tap into some of the great talent, because we're great in Japan, we're incredibly talented people. But more seriously, the logo for their company over on the left is organic intelligence, where it's about leveraging the collective intelligence and evolution that exists in nature, which is science, programmable, all of these things. And then the red fish being, they're going to do something different. And so we invested in Sakana AI. Our subgroup, NTT Docomo Ventures, is working very closely with them. Those are the 2 founders in the middle there. Lyon Jones is one of the co-authors of Transformer Model. So he was there at the beginning of all of it. And David Ha, also Google DeepMind. And then remember that picture I showed you of 2024 investments? So Sakana AI just raised $200 million in a Series A round, which NTT is an investor, and NVIDIA stepped in as an investor for this round. They've been around for 1 year, $1.5 billion valuation. OpenAI just announced, can anybody tell me how much OpenAI just raised? Anyone? Yeah, $6.6 billion at a $167 post-money value, $67 billion post-money valuation. So that chart that you saw earlier, that just blew right off. I wouldn't even be able to show you on the slide because it would be like off the charts there. So there's this continues and Jensen, who, when I was at NVIDIA, his office was on the 3rd floor, and it was all open. You could come up and talk to him anytime. Incredible leader. I can vouch for that for sure. So he said, countries are embracing sovereign AI to capture and codify their data, culture, and language through their own unique large language models. The team at Sakana is helping spur the democratization of AI by developing cutting-edge foundation models to automate and speed up scientific discovery with NVIDIA's accelerated computing platform. So scientific discovery is one of the things that, again, taps into thinking about how can we learn from the world around us and accelerate the research there for some truly breakthrough innovation that happens. And very proud that Sakana AI has established foundation in Japan. All right, so I do want to hopefully slightly, a little bit, blow your minds with a notion of what we're working with at NTT and research with a whole host of other people, is to address the fundamental challenges that we have, around the energy consumption. As I mentioned, when I was at NVIDIA, I experienced firsthand the heat in my pocket with the phones that would have NVIDIA GPU because it would get so hot. And so as more and more of the data center clusters try to keep up with the demand of Gen AI, there's a real challenge that's happening around how are grids going to keep up? How are we going to fuel Gen AI's hungry hippo appetite for Gen AI with the rocket rise of the data volume commensurate with power consumption? And we believe that the answer lies in operating at the speed of light. We're looking at how moving from an electronic to photonic infrastructure could significantly impact the energy consumption of AI. Yes, moving from electronic to photonic light particles to not just transfer energy or transfer data, between in fiber optics, because fiber optics have been around for a long time, but starting to make a shift around the computer infrastructure, the compute infrastructure at the chip level, at the application processor level, at the board level, and so on. So we have this idea of an innovative optical and wireless network. It's a consortium of other companies. If you haven't heard about it and you're interested in becoming part of the foundations of this in the forum, please reach out to me or any of my other NTT Data colleagues who are here in the audience with us. So the innovative optical and wireless network posits that moving from an electronic to photonic infrastructure, moving at the speed of light, will help around power consumption, latency, and being able to have much higher throughput, which is what data is going to do. And the numbers are very promising, what we're seeing right now in our labs. 100 times more power efficiency, 125 times the transmission capacity, and the end-to-end delay is reduced to 1/200th. So some amazing results that we're seeing, but moving from an electronic to photonic the whole thing requires not just the village. It takes more than a village on this. It takes all of us and the world around us. I'm excited to share that at the next World Expo next year in Osaka. Please come. I will be there. Not the whole time. It's 6 months. It runs from April to October of 2025. We'll be demonstrating the ION all-photonic network and what it can do for businesses, for industry, for academia, for government, everybody. So please come, and we're planning some great initiatives and programs there that we'd love to introduce you to. Okay, now we're on the topic of my recent favorite area, which is space. So it's like, okay, what does space have to do with AI and sustainability? Well, at NTT, we're working on this idea of a space-integrated computing network, which sounds a little obtuse, so let me unpack it. We're looking at the domain of terrestrial to, I love saying this, extraterrestrial, because we haven't said ET since the movie, maybe ET, now I've aged myself. But so moving from terrestrial to extraterrestrial and thinking about the multiple orbits in between, it all comes back down to data, connectivity, and intelligence across all of those domains, from GEO to LEO to HAPS. HAPS stands for High Altitude Platform Systems. They look like airplanes that fly unmanned. They hover like some of the balloons that some of you might know, to help us understand a little bit more about what's happening on Earth. And so the possibility is if data centers need to be cooled to run massive amounts of compute to fuel the future of Gen AI, could we put data centers in space? Is it possible? Because space, pretty cold, unless you're close to the sun, but it's a natural heat sink, putting a data center in space. And if you position the data center just right, you can have constant solar power to drive the data center compute needs. I know this sounds very futuristic. As I was in the conversation this morning, they're like, that sounds really futuristic. I was like, yeah, it's futuristic. Future's coming. In fact, the future's tomorrow. So data centers in space won't be tomorrow, but there's one startup called Lumen Orbit, excuse me. NVIDIA's invested in them. They wrote a white paper that I encourage you to take a look at. And the reason why data centers in space is a hot topic at NTT Data is because NTT Data is one of the leading data center providers in the world. So of course, for us, thinking about how we are going to be stewards for how we do this responsibly is key. And we've been doing space and satellite stuff for decades. So when I looked at this white paper, I thought it was really interesting where they did an analysis, right? The physicists and calculus folks on this team, they ran the analysis to demonstrate how compelling it could be. Because the fact of the matter is, there's developing countries that are having a hard time having their energy grid keep up with basic needs of their populations. If they're going to keep up with us on the more developed parts of the world around AI, is there hope for them to do that? Because they're not going to be able to drive or to feed the data center energy hunger. So, data centers in space. I'm super excited about it. There's a lot of skeptics, but getting there isn't just something that happens overnight. There's a lot of different things around edge computing in space that we're thinking about as well, where you do compute on satellite and to be able to process a lot of different data. And more specifically, when we talk about AI sustainability walking to a bar, one other area that we're working on when it comes to space and satellite is around Earth observation. So when I was writing the book, Beyond the Black Swan, I semi-foolishly thought that I needed to make sure that I did the academic rigor in the research. So I applied and enrolled in a dual master's degree at Leeds University in the UK while working at NVIDIA and while writing the book. I didn't see my husband, I didn't sleep. It was a lot of work, but my research paper that just got accepted and passed, so I'll be graduating this December. I'm very excited about that. But the research paper that I wrote is the commercial viability of satellite innovation to address climate change factors in ports. And so for any of you that are working in public sector or with a port ecosystem, rising sea levels or even the hurricanes that's happening in Florida right now is really underscoring how climate change is impacting the ways that we operate, public sector, energy, cities, all of this. And so space and satellite are important, and AI is going to not just drive some of the ways that we try to think about alternative ways to feed the hunger, but also about how AI is going to help us resolve a lot of different data points that come in, especially around Earth observation. And so AI sustainability meet at a bar, and what do they talk about? They talk about, how did we get here? Got here through, of course, pre-COVID, the start of AI to begin with, but COVID and the digidemic. It's about thinking about ultra-system design, which our brains are just not wired to think about more than a couple, maybe a few things, depending on how multitasking you're capable of doing. But a lot of systems that are now becoming, just in AI and sustainability alone, and now you bring the two together, and now you start having this astronomical leveling up of systems. And so ultra-system design. And part of resolving how we parse all of this in a way and train the models in a way that's going to be helpful for us and know what prompts to use is to bring industry, policy, and technology together, which is why this forum, and I congratulate the AI Congress and the team that's been pulling this together, for making this happen, because this is an example of how we bring industry, policy, and technology together to talk about some of these things in a way that creates a safe space and creates a space for inspiration around that. And then we just talked about the sustainability and AI alloy, the flexing of one and how that needs to influence the other, and how it's a constant dynamic of how these things come together. And we talked about doing this at the speed of light, moving from electronic to photonic, and then at the edge of space and beyond. I just want to close with bringing up a quote that I try to embody. You think I'm from Japan, being from Japan, and my father's side is Buddhist, so I've always thought that I should have this natural ability to meditate, but I don't. But when I do, take those moments to meditate often on the interconnectedness and mutual interdependence of all things in the universe. And so I think for all of you that came today, we have the opportunity to do that with each other. And this is from one of the great generals, Marcus Aurelius, Roman general. So with that, I hope you were able to understand why I titled my talk, AI and Sustainability Walk into a Bar, because you wouldn't necessarily think that those two walking to a bar are going to have much in common, but you can at least know that they're going to have a lot to talk about, and know that what they're going to talk about is going to have amazing impact and outcomes for what's ahead for us in the future. That's my email and my LinkedIn. Please connect with me, and I'm happy to take any questions. I know we just have a couple minutes left, but thank you. Arigatou gozaimasu.
Thank you, Rika. You explained and told us many things. A couple of points that I think are outstanding of your presentation, the idea of these deep optical networks that could lead us to a more sustainable operations in terms of AI computing, and this idea of placing data spaces in data centers in the space, which is very futuristic and something to think about. We have time for questions from the audience. Please take the advantage of having Rika here. Don't be shy and ask questions if you have. There's one over there.
Hello, my name is Pablo Valerio. I work for Especialment Media in the United States. We publish several publications in electronics, especially E-Times. Probably you're familiar with it. Basically, you gave a very interesting presentation about the future of certain technologies that can help with sustainability, and especially in the role of AI in everything today. Basically, my question is, what do we do in the next few years to make sure that the trend today to build more data centers, to create more semiconductors, I mean, we're using a lot of resources right now. And of course, your idea of, for example, photonics and creating, data centers in space is really exciting, but we have a problem now. And for example, I just learned that companies like TSMC and Samsung are planning to build semiconductor factories in the Middle East. When we're looking at water consumption, when we're looking at, it's not just the power of data centers, we are actually using resources from all over the world, and especially materials. One of my expertise is supply chains. And what do we do in the next, let's say, 5 years, to try to manage that kind of situation? I don't know if you can comment on that. And I would like to talk to you later on as well. Thank you.
Sure. Yes, that would be great. And please do find me right after, because I have to head out soon. But so thank you for the question, and it's an important one. And the thing about innovation that often gets overlooked is that it doesn't happen overnight. So even getting to some of these futuristic moments of around all-photonic network, or the idea of using Earth observation so we can better manage climate change, and the role that AI plays in us parsing through a lot of disparate, different kinds of data is something that doesn't happen overnight. We need to build the scaffolding to get there. So I think one is about knowing how we get there in a way that helps us make sure that we get there. So that's number one. And I know that doesn't solve the problem today. But I'm also thinking about how a lot of companies and organizations still haven't really created a more sophisticated system of being able to figure out how to manage things. Like, how do you manage something if you're not measuring it? And so really being able to deploy infrastructure that can help you get the data in to help you figure out how all these different patterns are interconnected. And even if it's just to meet compliance requirements as more and more of this regulation comes in. And by the way, that's also why you bringing technology industry and policy together is also important, because policymakers need to keep informed and know about what's happening in industry and what's happening on technology to figure out what they incentivize and what they fund. So I think finding ways to use AI, old-fashioned AI and new AI, the Gen AI, to better, well, first is deploying IT in a way that can help you manage the OT-IT convergence, operational technology IT converging. So whether if you're a mine or utility or city or automotive manufacturer, all of these different things, there's ways to be able to use IT sensibly to capture the data to begin with, whether that's carbon emissions, water usage, water leaks, methane gas emissions, all of these things. So making sure that you're being mindful about how to use technology in a way that's going to help you measure, to capture and measure that first. Because you can't improve something that you don't measure to begin with. So I think the near term is about understanding how to capture the data, then finding ways to use AI to help you do the pattern recognition and parse and automate certain things around that, find inefficiencies in the system, and to be able to drive some of those things forward. And I think we haven't fully exploited the possibilities around that, to do that. And then I also think circular economy. We didn't talk about that today, but circular economy is a big, big topic for us at NTT Data, which is about understanding. We work very closely with Cisco, for example, around how we recycle some of the resources that are made into things that can then be repurposed and reused for other areas. Regenerative economies is one of my favorite topics to talk about for anybody that would like to think about that. And also thinking about how these new areas of carbon markets and accounting principles and all these things are things that we can help inform because of things that we're now able to capture and measure and to be able to improve down the road. So I don't have a silver bullet. Maybe silver bullet is not the right terminology around this, but more, I don't have the right panacea for this. It's, I think it's a combination of different things and also what's in your power. But I think it's also really important for everybody to realize that micro moments, that's something else that I found in the research for the book, is instead of trying to do these grand motions and movements, it's adding up a lot of these micro moments that you can step back and realize the long tail of things. I was just telling one of the folks from the conference here in the elevator, they're like, oh, because I flew in from Japan and I'm flying somewhere else tonight in Singapore. They're like, wow, you fly a lot. And I don't feel good about flying because I'm in sustainability. So what I try to do, in addition to buying the offset, which I try to do as much as possible, whenever I'm in town, I try to take the public transportation. I'll be like, oh, I'll meet you there 20 minutes later because I'm hopping on the train. And they're like, why are you taking the train? Why don't you take Uber or taxi? It's like, well, because my micro moments, I need to try it. Because if 7 billion people take action on micro moments, that starts to add up. So, didn't fully answer your question, but please find me afterwards and happy to debate further. And to hear what you are hearing from others too. We're all learning from each other.
Yeah. We still have time from more questions.
One short question. I hope it's a short answer also. Jose Cruzet, I have a question because you were talking about photonic chips. Do you have an estimation, a guess, when they will be commercially available, more or less? Because I've heard this idea 5 years ago, and it's still not there. So.
Okay. And where are you with? Who are you with?
No, I'm from Alpha. It's a software company. We're working with. We're building AI models also, but I'm interested generally when these chips are available. Thanks.
I don't have an answer for you here. But if you reach out to me, NVIDIA is part of the ION Global Forum, as is, I believe, AMD and some of the other folks that are leading on the chip side. So, and I also, one of the people I worked for at NVIDIA was Renee Haas, who's now the CEO of ARM. And ARM is, of course, some of the foundations of some of the chip infrastructure and technology. So I will be able to get an answer for you if you reach out to me. Thank you.
Tenim temps per una pregunta més, si és que hi és. No? Molt bé. So, I think that that's...
No, it's great. Muchas gracias. Yeah. And I hope to hear from many of you. So thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Have a great
conference.
Bye-bye.